And they did. They tried. They interviewed.
My father, some others, invent whole new economy.
Before his passing, the Karate Kid star Pat Morita opened up about what really happened behind the scenes of the movie that changed his life. For years, fans only saw the calm and wise Mr. Miyagi on screen, but few knew the struggles, the near rejections, and the powerful moments that almost kept him from ever playing the role. Join us as we uncover the untold story of Pat Morita's fight to become Mr. Miyagi and what he revealed about the Karate Kid before his death. The unseen barrier. When people think of the Karate Kid, they picture Mr. Miyagi, wise, calm, and full of quiet strength. But before Pat Morita became that unforgettable figure, he faced a wall that almost ended his chance at the role. In Hollywood at that time, Morita wasn't seen as a serious actor. He was known mostly as a funny man, a stand-up comedian, and a sitcom regular. Audiences loved his humor, his timing, and his charm. To them, he was the guy who made them laugh on shows like Happy Days, not someone who could deliver deep, emotional performances. This image of him stuck hard. Hollywood has a way of putting people into boxes, and once you're in one, it's almost impossible to climb out. For Pat Morita, the comedian label became his biggest obstacle. Producers and executives couldn't picture him as anyone serious. To them, Mr. Miyagi needed to be a man with history, a war veteran, a mentor, and someone who carried pain and wisdom. Morita's past in comedy, they thought, made him the exact opposite. When his name first came up for the Karate Kid, producer Jerry Weintraub dismissed it right away. He reportedly said he didn't want a comic anywhere near the role. He wanted gravitas, a man with natural weight in his presence. In Weintraub's mind, Pat Morita couldn't possibly be that man. His decision was final. No auditions, no chances, not even a test. To Weintraub, the idea of Pat Morita as Mr. Miyagi was laughable. For weeks, Morita's name kept getting pushed aside. Every time it appeared on a list of possible actors, it was removed before it could even be discussed. It was as if Hollywood itself had decided he didn't belong in serious roles. For Pat, this was deeply discouraging. He had worked his whole life to be seen, to be taken seriously, but his past success in comedy had become a curse. It was keeping him from the one role that could truly show what he could do. While Weintraub stood firm in his rejection, director John Avildsen, who had already made Rocky a classic, had a different vision. He believed The Karate Kid wasn't just a movie about fighting, it was about mentorship, pain, and healing. To him, the heart of the story depended on the bond between Daniel and Miyagi. He didn't care about big names or preconceived ideas. He wanted truth and humanity on screen. Avildsen began to quietly push back. He asked the casting team to test every possible actor, even those the producers didn't want to see. It was his way of keeping the door open for unexpected talent. He understood that sometimes the right person doesn't fit the checklist. He wanted to see what each actor could bring, and that included Pat Morita. Still, the process dragged on. Weintraub and the studio searched everywhere else, through long lists of actors who looked the part, sounded the part, or had the kind of dramatic background Hollywood trusted. Morita's name was always a background whisper, never taken seriously. Casting directors tried to convince Weintraub to give him at least one shot, but the producer refused again and again. Eventually, Avildsen's persistence paid off. He insisted that Morita be allowed to audition, even if it was just as a formality. By then, weeks had passed, and dozens of actors had already been seen. Pat Morita was added to the very end of the list, the final name, the why not option. He was never supposed to make it into the room. The decision to let him try was more about closing the book than opening a door. But that single act, that one small chance, would soon change everything. It was the moment that would take Morita from being a forgotten comic to becoming one of cinema's most beloved mentors. Still, at that point, nobody knew it. Everyone, including Pat himself, thought it was just another dead end. When Pat Morita finally got the call to audition, he was at a low point in his career. Years of rejection had worn him down. He had been doing small gigs to make ends meet, struggling to find roles that let him show his depth. Acting no longer felt like a calling. It felt like a long road with no destination. Walking into that audition room, he carried all of that weight with him. He wasn't expecting to be chosen. He didn't even think anyone in the room believed in him. But he went anyway, because he knew he had to try. He knew that even if this was another rejection, it would be his last one given with everything he had. For Morita, that single chance wasn't just an audition. It was a moment of hope. It was proof that even when people close the door, sometimes life forces it open again. He understood that the opportunity itself was rare, and that maybe, just maybe, it was meant for him after all. That day marked the beginning of something he never expected. Not only a breakthrough in his career, but also a complete transformation of how the world would see him. And soon, in one strange audition room with a single camera and one man watching, everything would start to change. The one-man camera test. When Pat Morita finally walked into the audition room for The Karate Kid, he expected the usual Hollywood setup. A few people at a table, someone holding a clipboard, maybe a camera set up across the room. Instead, he stepped into an almost empty space. The room was quiet and stripped of distractions, and there was just one man waiting for him, John Avildsen, the director. But Avildsen didn't look like a regular director that day. He had a camera strapped to his shoulder and a heavy battery pack slung around him. Pat would later describe him as half man, half machine. It was a strange sight, and it made the moment feel different right away. Avildsen introduced himself warmly, but didn't lower the camera. He started recording the second Pat entered the room. It wasn't a formal setup. It felt more like a test of who Pat really was when no one was performing for him. There were no producers, no casting assistants, just Avildsen behind the lens and Morita in front of it. At first, Pat felt nervous. He knew that this was his one shot, a chance to show that he was more than a comedian. The silence made him aware of every movement, every word. But as the minutes passed, that nervousness began to fade. Avildsen didn't interrupt, didn't direct, and didn't rush him. He just listened, letting Pat talk. That small freedom allowed something rare to happen. The performance started to feel natural. Instead of trying to impress, Morita simply shared himself. He talked about his life, his struggles, and what it meant to finally be given a chance. Slowly, the tension in his shoulders eased, and the man in front of the camera wasn't acting anymore. He was simply being himself. That calmness opened the door for something special. Pat was tired that day, not just from travel, but from years of fighting to be taken seriously. The exhaustion showed in the way he spoke. His voice was slow, careful, and low. The pauses between his sentences carried more meaning than the words themselves. That natural fatigue shaped the rhythm of his speech, the very rhythm that would later define Mr. Miyagi's way of talking. Avildsen recognized it immediately. He wasn't interested in a polished performance. He wanted truth, the kind that couldn't be forced. So, he kept the camera rolling. Pat didn't even realize how much time had passed. They spoke casually at first, then moved into scenes from the script. There was no costume, no set, no co-star, just a man standing in front of a lens, pouring out years of unspoken emotion. When he finished, Pat assumed the audition was over. He gathered his things, ready to walk out. As he reached the door, Avildsen said something that stopped him cold. "Pat, don't you want to take your script with you? You might need it." That one sentence changed everything. It wasn't said as a joke or a polite gesture. It was a clue, a quiet signal that Avildsen saw something in him that everyone else had missed. For the first time, Pat felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, someone believed he could do it. He didn't say much back, just smiled, nodded, and left the room with his heart racing. That was the moment he later described as the turning point, the second when he realized he might actually become Mr. Miyagi. What started as another desperate audition had become something deeper. He hadn't just played a character, he had revealed himself. After that day, John Avildsen knew he had found his Miyagi. But there was still one huge problem. Jerry Weintraub, the producer who had refused to even consider Pat, was still convinced he wasn't right for the role. Avildsen decided to let the footage speak for itself. In a meeting with Weintraub and the other producers, he played the audition tape. The room was quiet as the screen came to life. There was Pat, not the comedian, not the man from Happy Days, but a calm, steady figure with a heavy presence. He wasn't delivering lines like an actor. He was speaking like someone who had lived them. The tired eyes, the soft tone, and the measured pauses, it all felt real. When the tape ended, there was silence. Then Weintraub broke it. He leaned forward and said, "Hey, wait a minute. That looks like Miyagi." Avildsen turned to him and replied, "That's Pat Morita, the one you didn't want to read for the part." It was the moment everything changed. The same man who had been dismissed without a chance was now the clear favorite. That single tape had broken through weeks of doubt and disbelief. Morita didn't have to fight anymore. The camera had done it for him. From that day on, no one in the room questioned if Pat could play Mr. Miyagi. They had seen it with their own eyes. The man they thought couldn't carry drama had carried the entire story in a few quiet minutes of film, proving he could be Miyagi. Winning over the room with one strong audition wasn't enough. After John Avildsen showed the tape and changed a few minds, the studio still wanted proof that Pat Morita could repeat that magic again and again. What followed was a string of 5 separate tests. Each session asked him to show the same focus, the same calm power, and the same depth. It wasn't about one lucky day anymore. It was about consistency and control, the words executives used to press their point. They wanted to be sure the performance would hold under pressure, on a busy set, with long days and tight schedules. For Pat, this meant walking back into rooms that had once dismissed him and keeping steady each time. He had to perform scenes in different ways, take direction on the spot, and prove he could live inside Miyagi without slipping. The tests weren't flashy. They were focused on craft. Could he land the pauses? Could he carry pain without overplaying it? Could he guide the boy at the center of the story while staying grounded and quiet? With each pass, he showed he could. He didn't rush. He didn't push. He let the character breathe through him and gave the room what it needed to see: reliability. Even with these wins, the mood around the tests was strict. Executives watched closely. They looked for cracks. But each time, Morita held the line. He showed the same presence that had moved Avildsen in the bare audition room. Piece by piece, the doubt started to loosen. What began as a plan to test him into failure turned into confirmation that he belonged. The third test raised the stakes. It was no longer just about Morita alone. The story lived or died on the connection between Mr. Miyagi and Daniel LaRusso, played by Ralph Macchio. So the next step was to see them together. Ralph flew in from New York, and the room shifted from a solo audition to a true screen test for chemistry. Their first reads were simple, a few lines, a few exchanges. But underneath the words, something important started to show. Morita's patience and calm gave Ralph room to be open and young and full of questions. Ralph's nervous energy gave Morita a reason to respond with care. The rhythm between them made the scenes feel natural. It didn't look rehearsed. It looked like two people meeting at the right time in their lives. As they moved to bigger scenes, the father-son dynamic revealed itself. Morita listened, and Ralph leaned in. The quiet humor landed without trying. The pauses filled with meaning. The words about chores, training, and respect felt real. In real time, the bond that would hold the film together formed in front of the camera. The team watching the monitor could see it. You can't fake trust, and trust is what began to glow between them. This was the anchor the movie needed. By the fourth test, the studio wanted to know if the image could match the feeling. They asked Morita to read in costume. He put on a simple GI. He kept the beard and hair that had already changed how people looked at him. He stood there not as a comedian trying to play serious, but as a man who looked like he had lived a life of work and loss. Ralph later said the transformation was immediate. He became Miyagi. It wasn't just the clothes. It was how Morita carried himself once he wore them. His posture changed. His eyes softened, but stayed alert. The room felt different, and even the doubters noticed. Costumes can help an actor, but here they unlocked something. The crew and executives started to see not just a strong audition, but a full character they could place into every scene of the film. Anxiety in the studio eased into quiet awe. People who had only seen a comedian began to respect the discipline in front of them. The more Morita settled into the look, the more the look disappeared, and the man remained. That is what moved the room. The costume didn't make him Miyagi. It allowed everyone else to finally see the Miyagi that had been there the whole time. The fifth and final test removed every safety net. No set dressing. No score to lift emotion. No crowd to feed energy. Just a cold sound stage, a camera, and the two actors. It was a deliberate trial. If the heart of the story could survive this, it would survive anything. They played key moments. Morita kept his voice low and clear. Ralph responded, less as an actor reading lines, and more as a boy finding someone to trust. The air in the room held steady. No one rushed to fill the silences, and those silences started to speak for them. The camera caught it all. The care in Morita's gaze, the way Ralph's shoulders dropped when he felt safe, and the small half-smiles that meant more than big speeches. When the scene ended, the room stayed still. People didn't need to talk. They had seen the truth on the monitor. This wasn't a gamble anymore. It was proof. The chemistry was there. The character was there. The film had found its core. With that final hush, the tests accomplished what they were meant to do. They showed that Pat Morita wasn't borrowing Miyagi for a moment. He was carrying him for an entire film. Next comes the call that changed everything, and the words no one expected the producer to say. The call that flipped the room. When the final screen test ended, the studio room fell into silence. For the first time, even Jerry Weintraub, the man who had once said a comedian should never play Mr. Miyagi, was quiet. On the monitor in front of him, Pat Morita and Ralph Macchio had just delivered something that no one expected. The room had been filled with people ready to judge, but by the end, they were simply watching. What started as another cautious test turned into a quiet moment of understanding. Weintraub leaned forward. watching Pat's calm face on the screen. The man he had once dismissed as too funny was now bringing tears to people's eyes with almost no movement, no music, and no tricks. The final test scene, an emotional exchange between Miyagi and Daniel, didn't need anything extra. It was raw and real. Pat's voice carried the weight of a man who had lived through loss. Ralph's eyes showed trust and warmth. It felt like two people meeting through honesty, not acting. As the scene ended, no one clapped. No one spoke. That silence was the proof Avildsen had been waiting for. He had known from the first audition that Morita had the heart of Miyagi, but now everyone else could see it too. Weintraub sat back, thoughtful. His mind had shifted. The producer who once refused to even let Morita audition was now faced with the undeniable truth. The film needed him. The tension in the room was gone. In its place was respect. That day marked a change in tone across the production. The disbelief that had followed Morita from one test to another finally cracked. Avildsen didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He knew that the tape and the performance had done the talking. Morita had not only earned the role, but he had also changed the atmosphere around the movie. The people who once saw him as a risk now understood he was the reason the film would work. While all this was happening, Pat Morita was at home. He didn't know what was being discussed, and no one had told him how the final test had gone. He had done his best and left it behind, trying not to think too much about it. Still, waiting was hard. Every actor knows that after an audition, silence can mean anything. Days of doubt can stretch forever when a career depends on one decision. Then the phone rang. On the other end was Jerry Weintraub. Pat didn't expect to hear from him personally, and when he realized who it was, he braced himself for bad news. But Weintraub's voice was different. No arrogance, no harsh tone. Instead, he spoke with a mix of honesty and humility. "Pat," he said, "I almost made the worst mistake of my life." There was a short pause before he continued. "I just want to be the first to congratulate you. You've got the part of Miyagi." For a moment, Pat didn't speak. The words hung there, heavy and unreal. Then he let out a quiet breath. After all the rejection, the endless tests, and the doubts, it was done. He had the role. But his reaction wasn't loud or proud. There was no gloating. No, "I told you so." That wasn't his way. He simply thanked Weintraub and said how grateful he was for the chance. It was a calm victory, built on patience and grace. Morita never spoke harshly about Weintraub afterward. In later interviews, he even said he respected the man for admitting he was wrong. To Pat, that call wasn't just good news. It was closure. It was proof that persistence could turn disbelief into respect, even in a business known for closing its doors too quickly. When he hung up, he sat for a long time in quiet thought. The role he had fought for was finally his, and he knew what it meant. It wasn't only about work. It was about being seen for who he truly was. The night of the drunk Miyagi scene. For Pat Morita, one of the most powerful nights on the Karate Kid set came during the filming of the drunk Miyagi scene. It was a quiet, emotional moment when Mr. Miyagi opened up about losing his wife and child while serving in World War II. The scene revealed the man behind the mentor, the pain, the loneliness, and the depth of the character. The studio was unsure about including it. Some executives thought it might slow down the film or confuse audiences who saw Miyagi as the calm teacher and not as someone broken by grief. But Pat fought for it. He believed the scene was essential. It showed who Miyagi truly was and explained the strength behind his calm. Without it, Miyagi would have been only a guide, not a man. On the night of filming, the set felt heavy. The crew dimmed the lights, and the sound of crickets played faintly in the background. Pat didn't need much direction. He walked into the scene carrying decades of personal experience, his struggles as a comedian, his memories of wartime internment camps, and his journey through rejection in Hollywood. When the cameras rolled, he didn't act, he remembered. The performance was raw. His words came out broken and uneven, filled with quiet sorrow. When he finished, no one moved. The crew didn't clap, they didn't speak. They simply stood there, letting the weight of the moment settle. It was one of those rare times when everyone knew they had just witnessed something real. Pat later said that night meant more to him than any award he could have received. It proved to him that truth could outshine everything else: humor, fame, and expectation. Another moment that Pat loved came from the opposite end of the emotional scale, the fly and chopsticks scene. It was one of the film's funniest sequences, where Miyagi calmly tries to catch a fly with chopsticks as Daniel watches. On paper, it was a simple gag, but on set, it became something more. Pat played it with quiet focus, his eyes locked on the invisible fly as if it were the most serious task in the world. Ralph Macchio watched, half amused and half impressed, while trying to follow along. The laughter that came when Daniel succeeded wasn't planned. It was real. Both actors broke into genuine smiles, and the crew joined in. For Pat, that scene showed the true spirit of the Karate Kid. It wasn't about martial arts or competition. It was about patience, humor, and the small lessons that reveal character. He loved that the audience could laugh with Miyagi, not at him. He made sure the humor felt warm, never mocking. Later, he would say that the scene's balance of comedy and calm reminded him that even light moments can teach something lasting. Off-screen, Pat Morita wasn't just a co-star to Ralph Macchio. He became a mentor. Ralph was still a teenager during filming, trying to handle sudden fame and the pressure of leading a major movie. Pat noticed his uncertainty and quietly guided him through it. He talked to Ralph about patience, professionalism, and enjoying the process rather than chasing results. Their friendship grew naturally. Between takes, they often sat together, sharing food or stories. Pat would tell him about his life before acting, his struggles, and the lessons he'd learned along the way. Ralph listened, sometimes forgetting that this man had once been a stand-up comedian. Their connection off-camera mirrored what the audience would later see between Daniel and Miyagi. There was a sense of care and trust that couldn't be faked. Ralph would later say that his scenes with Pat worked because they were real. He wasn't pretending to look up to him. He truly did. In the early days of filming, some members of the crew still had doubts about Morita. They wondered if the comedian from Happy Days could pull off a serious role. But as production went on, that skepticism faded. Every day, Pat proved he wasn't playing a part. He was living it. He developed small rituals to stay grounded in Miyagi's mindset. Sometimes before shooting, he would quietly sit in a corner, mumbling short thoughts in Miyagi's tone to stay connected to the character. He also kept a calm presence on set, speaking softly and offering bits of advice or humor to the crew. Over time, people started coming to him with questions, or just to talk. They called it getting Miyagi wisdom, half as a joke, but also because his calm answers often helped. By the time filming wrapped, the atmosphere around him had changed completely. The same crew who once doubted him now looked at him with respect and warmth. When the cameras stopped rolling and the production ended, Pat carried those quiet moments with him. The laughter from the chopstick scene, the tears from the drunk Miyagi night, and the bond with Ralph Macchio all stayed close to his heart. Those experiences reminded him that the movie's real magic wasn't in the big fight scenes or the famous crane kick. It was in the relationships and the truth shared between people. If you enjoyed this, make sure to like this video, Subscribe for more behind-the-scenes Hollywood stories, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an upload.